G'day everybody. In today's discussion, I want to look at a really interesting book. It's called Not Born Yesterday by Hugo Mercier. Now, Hugo is a cognitive scientist, and the principle behind the book is the capacity to influence people. Now, the narrative looks at it from a political perspective. He explores people like Hitler and his ability to galvanize the German people in the 1930s and early part of the 1940s. And create an environment and a situation of adoration, almost Beatle-like. Then we look at discussions on Trump and his capacity to impact on what many might regard as the disenfranchised poor in the United States and generate enormous interest in his message. The question I was asking, or wanting at least to be looked at, was, is it possible to influence people that are not committed in the first place? And how do you go about doing that? Now, this is an important question from a leadership point of view in the corporate space in terms of how do we create a marketing message? How do we craft that message? Well, the principle of the book really argues that you can't. As my interpretation of the book would suggest, is that there has to be a little grain of influence and interest in what the message is about, and then you build upon it. In the case of Hitler and his warped view of Jews and anti-Semitism, there's always been an underlying anti-Semitic thread embedded in European society, and in fact in all societies, if we look at what's happening on the streets of the West today. The question is, how do you identify that nurdle? How do you identify that grain, and how do you make it flourish for good or for evil? So from a marketing point of view and from a business point of view, when constructing a message, it's really important to understand if there's an element of the message that has fertile ground within the individual target group you're looking at. That requires research, it requires the capacity to have insight, and it also means the message itself will fall on deaf ears if those ears are not attuned to what it's about, which is self-evident. So in constructing a message, the book would argue, first and foremost, you must find that grain of interest and then expand upon it, extrapolate it, nurture it. And eventually that grain of interest will become awareness and ultimately action and hopefully advocacy. It's a worthwhile book, but you'll have to read not so much between the lines, but understand the principles of what Hugo is talking about, and then have the capacity to link it to the corporate space. Irrespective, it's an interesting discussion in terms of what's happening geopolitically in the world today. I recommend the book, and I think it's worth your time to at least consider it. I look forward to seeing you next time when we look at the next book review. Have a good day.